What kind of a world do we want to live in? This podcast opens the difficult and uncomfortable conversations about crime, addiction, poverty, and more. If we want a healthier community, these messy conversations need to happen. This is Dangerous Ideas for Social Change. All right, welcome to Dangerous Ideas for Social Change. We're going to have another conversation, and hopefully this one I feel is going to get closer to that dangerous line because I have, it's going to be a really interesting topic today. Jennifer Brisson is with us. Did I say that right, Jennifer?
Yeah.
Pretty good. So Jennifer and I served together on the CBC Community Advisory Board, and so we kind of, I don't think we've met in person.
No.
We've kind of, sparred on the Zoom calls, and we've, given our feedback to CBC, and realized that we have some sort of intersecting interests. And so Jennifer is the Associate Director of Open Circle and COSA, which is Circles of Support and Accountability. So Jennifer, it's about you anyhow today. We want to hear from you.
Perfect.
Talk about your story a little bit on how you got to be where you are today. Just
Sure. Yeah. I would say so on a professional level. The way that I got to where I am today is I have a background in criminal justice. That's my BA from the University of Winnipeg. I had always been super interested in kind of diving more into neglected parts of society or misunderstood parts of society. Mm-hmm. And on a personal level, I think that it came from growing up in turmoil. I grew up not far from our site here at Aberdeen Avenue, and I'm an only child, and I witnessed and experienced a whole lot of violence growing up at the hands of my father against my mother. And it was terrifying to know that nobody was able to help. It didn't matter who you told. It didn't matter if it was the police or, a shelter or something like that. And so that really spoke to me. So I started visiting men and women in prison and jail when I was 19 years old. 19,
and they let you in?
Yeah.
Crazy. Okay.
Yeah. I started volunteering with Open Circle, which is a prison visitation program, and then got involved with Circles of Support and Accountability through that. And the programs just made sense to me, where open communication is encouraged and you're able to really get to the core of what's going on with people.
I've got to just sort of double back to your story.
Yeah.
It's sort of amazing. I'm always so amazed by people who, tell the story about their life and then they jump into the good they're doing in the future. And how I'm so curious about you've experienced violence in your home.
Yeah.
You know it personally, and then you walk towards that space willfully. I'm just curious, what motivated that? What's the deeper, where did that come from?
My mom is a wonderful, wonderful woman who was with my dad for 35 years before they split up. So it wasn't something that was, fresh and new. But the entire time that she was with him, she would tell me, like, this isn't normal. This isn't okay. And she has a ton of compassion. And I think that's why she ended up staying with somebody that really treated her poorly for a very long time. Mm-hmm. And that just outweighed the hatred and the violence and the rage so much. And we have our fair share of sort of complications from a relationship like that,
For sure.
But as a kid, I was a mediator.
Right.
I knew how to say, okay, this is enough, and I can separate you two, and I can get this person here and this person here, and I'm going to be able to break down what's been going on and then break down how we solve it. And certainly you're a kid, it doesn't work.
Right.
But in your mind,
it's familiar.
Exactly. And so you're solving problems from a really young age and having to mature really quickly. Mm-hmm. And that felt natural to me and still does. And so I think there's a way to take something unhealthy and turn it into something really positive and healthy and choose to break a cycle and know that that's what is meant to happen.
That's unbelievably profound.
Well,
That's amazing. Already we've hit one profound point. So here you are.
Yeah, buckle up.
So, yeah, it's going to only get better. So here you are then.
Yeah.
You're 19, you're visiting prisons, and then I take it university sort of followed. Tell us a little bit about that journey and then to where you are today.
Yeah. So during university, I was also volunteering with Open Circle, the prison visitation program. And through that, I became more interested in the restorative justice program, COSA, that focuses on working exclusively with people who have sex crimes against people in the community, whether it's children, adults, in some cases, animals. I do need to put the trigger warning in at some point.
Yeah, we
here.
Talked about talking about this, how to talk about this.
Yeah.
Why don't you do that, trigger warning? How do you do this?
Sure. So for me, trigger warnings are important and valuable and also really hurtful to conversation sometimes, because I think that when we offer a trigger warning, it's sort of permission to shut this off and say, I don't need to hear about this. That doesn't affect me, or it does affect me, and I'm not comfortable hearing something like this. And so I think they're really valuable in the way that for survivors, for thrivers of folks that have experienced sexual violence, it's important to know up front what you're getting. But the reality is these people have lived through this experience.
Yeah.
There is rarely something that you will hear that will take you to a place that's so shocking and so dark that you haven't been there before. Right? We all tend to relate and seek to relate and to connect. And I think it's fair to feel like you need to take a step back. Like I understand that and I get that and I very much respect that, which is why I do this. On the other end of the spectrum, when I hear people say, how could you read those files of what people have done? Or how can you sit down with somebody who's offended against little children or something like that? The reality is that it's reality. We need to be able to understand these things and hear these things, because it doesn't make it any less impactful for the person who went through it.
Right.
For us to ignore it and say,
well put,
I'm not comfortable hearing this, so I'm not going to hear it. So that sounds probably very terrible to some.
No, it's kind of an invitation though for people. Okay, if somebody's like in that beginning of their journey of healing, this may not be the conversation for them, but it's an invitation to the wider listener group that is like, I think we need to have this conversation. Absolutely.
It's incredibly prevalent. And so I like to say up front that I usually don't share details of crimes, things like that. What we do talk about is what's going on in people's lives when they make a decision that hurts somebody in that way, that creates that kind of harm. And also, how do we respect and acknowledge and pay tribute in a way? That sounds like a weird way to put it, but how do we understand that victim experience without discussing these sorts of things?
Good point. Yeah, so it's actually a form of empathy for victims, and we just need to kind of open that lens and look in and see a little bit of what people are going through. I've had recently conversations with people in our community and just yesterday with the media on the topic of violence. And what I've come to sort of take note of is that often the commentary about violence in our community is sort of laid out there to the satisfaction of listeners. And I keep remembering the victims. Actually, this conversation, we should be having it to the satisfaction of victims, because they're the ones that are really facing it. And so, and that's, sadly, I think we do forget that.
Absolutely. It's it's a tough conversation, and this might be a sticky point, and you can edit later. One
No
of the challenges,
We're bravely going.
edit free. Okay.
Yes.
One of the challenges I would say that I've experienced over the years, having worked for a faith-based organization all this time, is that within the faith community, sometimes it's really hard to remember the victims. We so quickly and so quickly, I'll stick with, want to forgive. And I don't think it's up to us to forgive.
I'm curious whether you have any insights on what is it about people of faith? Like, is there something in the water? Is there something in the theology? What do you think that is?
I think there's an extreme discomfort with being completely transparent around what people have experienced in faith communities, and also what they've perpetrated. Because there is often a cycle that exists, and the faith community is one of the quickest to forgive, and I think that there's real value in that, but I also think it leaves us forgetting about the victim. And then you wonder, well, whose place in the community is more important? Do we need to put an importance on places in community? Why is it that often the victim feels as though they can't speak about it and nobody else can, and it's to protect the person
The
who
offender.
created this? Yeah.
I think maybe to bolster your case, here I go. I think there's so much in Scripture that talks about the importance of if you don't forgive, you will not be forgiven. And I think that sometimes people look at that stuff and they totalize it. They say, "Oh, that's true everywhere."
Absolutely.
But there's certain cases where, like in the day-to-day missteps, it is important to forgive each other, for the things we do, the little slip-ups. But on bigger things, I think we kind of do an injustice to what forgiveness actually is if we try to short-circuit that. So, interesting insight.
We forget about healing. We really forget about healing. Forgiveness feels like you clear the slate.
Right.
And the next day we can all move forward. And often a victim survivor is sitting there going, I'm not over it. I haven't even understood it yet. And that's where silence comes in, right? And that's where abandonment of culture and community and family comes in. And that's the ultimate destroyer, is that isolation.
Yeah.
That's what often victims and survivors experience, and then also what offenders experience. They've so often been through that cycle already and not been able to acknowledge something and then perpetuate those same actions onto someone else, and then have to, in their minds sort of rectify what's been done and how it's happened. And I'm probably getting off topic here.
No,
but
we're doing exactly what we always do, which is we just do a circuitous route through a topic, and we will end up where we end up. And so I think I may be curious, for the sake of our listeners, what is it about folks, first of all, who are offenders that it would be important for people to understand? And then also for victims, just help us kind of, climb into the skin of somebody who's, that's a creepy thought, but you know what I'm saying? Like, try to help us understand.
I would say that really at the end of the day, the biggest thing that we forget as humans, as society members, as community, is that we are all so much more alike than we realize. We have so much in common with the average person on the street. I've yet to meet somebody in prison. I've met thousands of people, and I've yet to meet somebody who didn't have really a single redeeming quality or something that said, hey, funny sense of humor or art or something that connects you to someone else and can be... Oh, I thought you were going to
human. Well, I was, because what you're what you're talking about is something we've talked about around here, is that how we often, if somebody's committed an offense, we boil down the whole of who they are to that offense.
Absolutely.
And
you're no better than the worst thing you've ever done.
Exactly. That's exactly the line we use.
Yep.
And I think that it's, imagine if that was, if we put that on ourselves.
Yeah.
If I was defined by the worst thing I've ever done, it would be, what an existence. But yeah, keep going, Jennifer. Help us understand.
We talk about that a lot. The idea of being defined by the worst thing that you've ever done, and that at COSA we can offer an environment where you are more than the worst thing that you've ever done. You are so much more as a human. When we ask people to sit down with us and talk about their offenses, which is part of the accountability process in the program, is that you need to be able to admit that this happened. This event, your actions affected somebody. You did time in prison, jail, you got out, and you're now engaged with this program. And it can't be this back and forth of the police report says this and that's inaccurate, so I won't take responsibility for that, or something like that. It comes down to something happened, right? Something really inappropriate where boundaries were broken, where trust and community and so many pieces that make up someone's life have now been affected. And the consequence is, as it rightly should be, to often remove that person from the community. They've shown themselves to be untrustworthy. And then to create conditions that will align with a lifestyle that hopefully they can commit to. The conditions around people with sex crimes are a whole other story because they make things virtually impossible. But I understand that a lot of people in society would feel very comfortable with that. And that the illusion of safety trumps everything else.
That's going to boost our ratings.
Oh, good.
Just
yes,
say his
perfect.
name, conjure it.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that there's a really big misconception that the people that come to our program and victims are not living in the same group, if that makes sense. Because most of what we know is that the old, classic saying of like hurt people is true. Mm-hmm. And that's what we see most commonly. And so once we can kind of get to the core of what's been going on in someone's life for some time, that's everything. Because, and now I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a clinician, but I will say that in my experience of about 12, 13 years doing this, that people who won't take responsibility and accountability for what they've done, especially with sex crimes, haven't accepted what has happened to them.
Expand on that.
If people, this might be a little bit crass, and
Please be crass. Say it straight.
I've worked with so many people over the years, and I remember one of them in particular saying to me, I'd read over his files, so we get access to, information from corrections around how programming went, how psychology appointments went, how, behavior in correctional institutions was, that sort of thing, to prepare and safely be able to support people. And you'll read someone's file and it'll say, in prison, someone was asked about if they were ever sexually assaulted in their life, or if there'd ever been anything that was untoward, happening as a child. And so often you hear people say, oh yeah, well, my grandma used to touch me, but I'm fine. Mm. And you sort of think, you're not fine. You're in prison for having repeated this cycle with someone else. That's not fine. But the stigma is so big and so intense, and people, for survival, deny it. And then it passes on into, newer generational stuff. And there's this idea that, well, that victim will be okay because I went through that and I'm okay.
Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah.
It's like the original idea of, shell shock and PTSD and how we didn't talk about any of that.
Right.
It was
It's
you
just
had
something
people,
that happens in war or
yeah.
yeah.
And then all of a sudden, your child is showing these real, there's so much research out there around like the anger and the distrust and really unsocial, non-social behaviors that came from children who had veterans for parents. Mm-hmm. And in the last several years, 20, 25 years, we've started talking about PTSD and what that means. And we have respect for that.
Yeah.
And then when it comes down to someone who's repeating a cycle of violence that as a society, we're not ready to talk about, I don't think we should ever be ready to accept it. That's the opposite of what I think. But being able to talk about it is key.
Right.
How else do you move forward?
I have to ask a question, which I think I know the answer to, but you're not saying that if people are sexually abused, they're likely to sexually abuse someone. Do you have any stats or data on that? I'm hitting you cold on this. Like what is the data on that? Like what percentage of people that have committed a violent sex crime were themselves victims?
I don't have the stat for you offhand because honestly, the stats don't represent reality when it comes to talking about sexual violence.
No.
It's incredibly underreported. It's incredibly well hidden.
Secrecy is kind of one of the main points that offenders sort of hold over.
Exactly.
To hold the secret.
Secrecy is the biggest weapon that people have over a victim, whether it's domestic violence, sexual violence, that is what controls someone. The shame, the humiliation, all of that is really what keeps people silent. Not to mention the fact that most people don't experience any sort of justice in the way that we would look at it traditionally. So I would say no, not everyone that experiences sexual violence is going to continue down that path. When there's no resources, when there's no communication, when there's no connection and opportunity to discuss these things is when cycles repeat.
I heard Gabor Mate say that he had never met anybody who was caught up in addiction and homelessness who had not been sexually abused. And so I'm wondering whether there's kind of sort of two possibilities about one sort of acting out and the other sort of acting in. Like for someone who's just caught up in this addictive cycle, a way of coping, I don't know what you've experienced or seen out there.
Yeah. And I mean, even from speaking from personal experience, having been through sexual violence in my life and experiencing that, it certainly was something that turned inward, personally. And then having worked with people who have turned it outward, it's bridging this gap of trying to understand why it is that some go this way and some go that way. And
Do you know the answer to that?
I don't think so. One of the things that I learned over the years was that when I was doing this work really early on in my early 20s, now I'm in my late 20s, kidding. But, there was empathy, instilling empathy in people felt so important to me. I thought that was key to having people understand that what happened was wrong and feeling guilty and working on yourself is what's going to propel you forward.
Are you talking about people that you were working with who had committed the offense?
Yeah.
You were trying to build empathy?
Yeah.
Okay, I understand.
Trying to build that, empathy within a place where empathy is not a capacity that some people have when they've never experienced it. If it hasn't been shown to you, it's not something that, we talk a lot about in society about, that person has no empathy. And I think the reality is people can't access empathy.
I had a kid in our community tell me, every time I'm having something I think is a feeling, I have to Google it and because she just couldn't identify. And so it was just sort of like the death of empathy, or maybe it was never even born.
Yeah. And then you try to instill it in someone who hasn't experienced it as a raw human experience, where someone can really say, I get what you're going through and I'm sorry. Or I don't get what you're going through and I'm still sorry that this is happening. Or, having that extra bit of support, stuff like that. And any sort of time that we shut ourselves off from those big, hard emotions like sadness and depression and all those sorts of things, and we just kind of keep going along with what is pleasing for us, like, whether it's addiction, whether it's hurting somebody to make yourself feel better and feel more powerful, something like that, there's just this loss of humanity there. And so trying to rebuild that is something that is usually going from scratch. It's not rebuilding, it's building. People talk about, people need to reintegrate into society after prison. And I say, what if they were never a part of any community or society? What if they never really had that? Then that's not reintegration. That's integration for the first time. And that's not sitting down with an 8-year-old. That's sitting down sometimes with a 65-year-old.
Who's never experienced it.
Absolutely.
So I have to ask, how do you get there? You have somebody you've described who may not have capacity for empathy and who's sitting on some hurt, some pain, and then is in this place. How does it work? How do you get sort of integrate somebody into society, integrate somebody into community? How does that happen?
Certainly not a perfect process. More, what's the phrase I always use now? I can't think of it. But more an art than a science,
Yeah.
So there's a lot of building communication and trust with people over a long term. Consistency, super important. When you're working with folks who have often experienced loss at a grand scale, whether it's you can't live in your home community anymore, whether it's you never had a community to begin with, or really anything that kind of goes through, I'll say it, like through governmental agencies and things like that, people who've experienced terrible experiences with police, with corrections, with CFS, with social security type things. It's hard to build that trust with people. Mm-hmm. So it's a long-term commitment. And I think sometimes people wonder, how is the work going to Tim Hortons and having a coffee? But that is the work. It's showing up all the time, once a week for a couple of hours with a couple of volunteers who are there. They're not being paid. They're there because they want to see a safer community. And they're willing to give their time to put into that goal.
Okay, I just got to jump in and say, so as our listeners are taking this in, I'm guessing there's some opposition that you would probably hear from folks that hear about the work you're doing, because there's all this disdain and anger, and some people want retribution for people that have committed these crimes. How do you speak to kind of that anger in the ether?
Compassion, empathy, understanding. You're never going to change someone's mind with, my grandpa used to say, you catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. I truly believe that. And I also think that if we can look hard at ourselves and understand that given the right or wrong circumstances, any of us could be in the position of being someone who's hurt someone who has supported a family member who's hurt someone. It's not simply one person that's affected when a crime is committed, right? It's not simply offender victim. It's an entire community. It's society as a whole hearing about this. And when society steps back and says, not my problem, it's a huge problem.
It is your problem.
It is. It's
our
everyone's problem. That's why, I respect so much and have long been a student of restorative justice initiatives and really focusing on that. And the one sort of issue that was raised to me about it was restorative means that we're restoring back to where we were as a community, as a society. So that's where we still expect violence and sexual crimes and things like that. Whereas transformative justice really demands as a society that we transform the way that we think, the way that we respond, the way that we decide to move forward is huge. And yet we've sort of said, I'm fine with this process. When I see that public alert come out and say this person's getting out of prison on this day, and I'm going to make my voice heard that this person shouldn't be let out. And the reality is we know nothing about the human behind that. And there's really very little evidence and research to support the idea that public notifications and things like that work.
Right.
But there's this celebration of it. It feels good.
It's tangible. You said something at the beginning of our conversation that I kind of still have rolling around my head. You talked about illusions of safety. Is that mapping onto what you're talking about now? Where
Absolutely.
Okay, talk about that, please.
So for me, the illusion of safety is the idea that if you keep your kids inside the home and don't let them play in the front yard, somehow that creates like a level of safety, right? That your kid's not going to be kidnapped, they're not going to be picked up. The reality is that I think it's nearing 90% in recent research of people knowing their victims first.
Right.
Right? So family members, friends of family, it could be just about anyone that we really give trust.
So sort of random acts are quite rare.
Extremely rare. And so this idea that we can somehow protect our children by telling them that you don't get into a stranger's car who's offering you candy, or stranger danger, these sort of things that came up in the 80s and 90s that have really, I think, terrified people and have been fear-mongering.
Having your cereal, looking at that missing kid.
Yeah.
Like freaks
The
you
milk,
out from time you're a little kid.
Yeah. And it's meant to do that. And we are living in a society where that is that person on the cereal box, on the milk, whatever, right, is demonized. Well, not the child, but like as soon as we know when whoever is caught or they're not caught, it's always mind-blowing to people that how could it have been, the uncle? How could it have, we never would have known. And so often, I don't know if you're familiar with the book The Gift of Fear by Gavin DeBecker, but
Sounds interesting.
It's an incredible book written by someone who is just understands violence and predicts it really accurately. And he would talk about how he'd sit down with a family and they would say, our daughter's been missing for this long, or our son's been missing for this long, and we don't know who it is. And he said, inevitably, it was always when they said, I know it can't be this person, but I'm just going to say the name. And that was who it ended up being. We have this sense. We know who to trust. And we know, and that doesn't put any blame on the victims.
I see where you're going with this.
But we know and we have a sense, but our sort of politeness and this idea that, well, you can't say that to somebody, takes over in situations where instincts are so key and so important. And then we wonder why crimes are reported at such a low rate compared to reality.
Is it that we want to believe that surely they couldn't do this, not that person? Is it our desire to believe the best in people, or is it just some kind of a coping mechanism? Or what is it?
I think it's more shame than anything. Shame totally takes over. When you look at when a sexual assault, sexual crime happens, the shame that disperses and ripples through the water is for the family, the victim, the children, the community, everyone. It's so real and so strong. And we view it as weakness, this shame. And so when someone says, I don't want to put, myself through the process of going to court and stuff, it's fair. You can understand why someone wouldn't report it. And you can understand why they would protect themselves in that way. If you look at the recent Hockey Canada case.
Right.
And I have no opinion.
The process is the pain.
The process is the pain. The court really does nothing for victims. It's all about a crime that has occurred. It broke the law. There's nothing personal there. There's nothing that really understands that someone can be heartbroken and experiencing total loss and not wanting to live anymore because of what they've gone through and experienced. And that ventures so much more beyond the immediate person or people that were affected. It keeps going and it lasts generations. And we, I think, end up with people who have lived so much in a cloud of shame, and that's what they've experienced from other people in family and community, that it becomes almost impossible to know when we can share something and when we can't. You often hear about children being afraid to tell their parents about someone's hurting me, or a young woman or a young man or boy coming forward, which is a whole other ball game where so underreported. And there's just no resource for that. If you go to the police, you're questioned and treated like a criminal. And it's often not a safe environment for people to come forward and talk about it. Not to mention the level of detail that you have to go into initially, and the violation again of going through, a kit that detects for sexual assault and will take samples and stuff. And it's very violating. And then the realities of potential for, say, like pregnancy or STIs or something that can be life-changing and affecting. And the shame spiral I've found just kind of continues into that more and more and more.
It feels like you're almost
going off script.
No, you're doing this is so interesting, but that shame kind of seems to be the common denominator between both victim and offender. And,
absolutely.
And in the interest you said early on that there's a danger of over discussing or over focus on offenders. So let's maybe switch gears and talk a little bit about victims. Talk about what their journey is. Just riff on that.
Sure. What I would say is that in our program in COSA, we focus every meeting as though the victim were sitting in the room with us. So there's not a lot of opportunity that is safe, I would say, right now in Manitoba, Canada, beyond, where victim-offender mediation can happen for really serious crime like that.
Right.
So we are left with sort of the opportunity to work with people who've been victimized and then also have gone down the road of offending. And we also really try to be able to reflect what we think victims would want in a circle. That's what we call our meetings every week, or circles. So for us, it's really opening the door to trying to push our motto of no more victims. So with offenders, we certainly have tough conversations around the offending, around plans for the future and goals, and really setting up community, because isolation's a killer. Isolation is something that leads back to crime so often. And can you blame somebody? If you only have to justify something to yourself, it's really not that hard. It's often the same cycle that addiction follows.
Right.
And so if you can view it from that framework, I've found over the years, it's been really helpful around being able to kind of call out that kind of behavior that is going to be damaging in the future. And I mean, certainly people have to be ready to hear it, right? But I think sort of the biggest disservice that we do to victims is that there really isn't much out there in terms of support. And the same is very true for people who've offended. But you look at something like victim services within Manitoba government, and it's limited.
Yeah.
It's limited. It's if if the person's not convicted of a crime, are you still considered a victim? And often the case is no. And also I think that victim services and programs like that need to open up to also the people that have offended, because that's really where we need to be focused. Like, victims need, of course, a ton of support, and sadly often they have to find that on their own, within their own communities, within their own homes, within and we really focus on making sure that victim impact and experience is hopefully communicated through what we do every week by sitting down with people, calling out behavior that's dangerous or unhealthy from our perspective, celebrating when great things happen. We're celebrating one of the participants having a job for a year next month. Never happened before for him.
It's wonderful.
Yeah. It's great. And we can also honor victims through our conversations and through the way that he is building his life, because there's no way to make good on what's happened. There's no way to make good on what's happened when you've hurt someone in that way and broke those boundaries in that way. What needs to happen is that you commit to never doing it again and working on yourself. So sorry, I'm really rambly, but I do think that there's so much more as a society that we need to be demanding and doing. It's not going to come down to harsher laws. It's not going to come down to something where victims have more spaces to gather. The reality is that we need to understand how we move towards no more victims and how we form ourselves. There's a lot of communities that are able to practice their own accountability and their own way of understanding the society around them and being able to dictate what's okay and what's not and what the consequences are. And usually that doesn't come down to the traditional system of retributive justice.
Right.
It comes down to finding alternative ways to address harm and really being genuine in that. Yeah.
So, okay, Jennifer, you're the grand puppeteer, and and you get to redesign a society, a world.
Oh boy,
this is going to be fun. This might be our second podcast.
Yeah, no kidding.
But you're going to get to redesign our world so that it's kind of that beautiful space that everybody wants to live in. It's kind of terrible to think about the idea of offenders out there, and then to think about victims isolated and cut off. If you could socially engineer things, what kind of a world do we need for us to have less harm and more beauty? Incidentally, I gave her no time to think about this question.
Give me a moment here.
Yeah.
I think that some of our flaws as society are what makes us very human, and what can inspire something actually positive. So I don't think that sexual violence and violence in general are something that are necessary to a community to be able to appreciate and value and learn what we need and what we have, because I think we know that that's more damage than anything else, and has truly put us sort of in the position where we are as a society right now of hate and ignorance. And I look at the volunteers that come to our program, COSA, and I think that's what we need. We need people who step up.
You're living in that perfect world.
I have met, I've engineered it. No. And I think we have about 40 volunteers, which is incredible, because you don't often walk into a room and find one person that would want to sit down every week with someone who's committed sex crimes. And the reality is that the volunteers are there voluntarily, and the participants are there voluntarily. They can never be court mandated to do this program. We don't want to work with people who aren't interested in having difficult conversations and having forward-thinking ideas and being open to that accountability and that process. Because there's no relationship without accountability, right? That's the way that I think about it. You have to be able to say to someone, I don't know about that. Can you explain to me maybe why you think that way? And can we talk about it? Because that doesn't sit right with me, or whatever the case may be. And so the volunteers come to the table ready to have that conversation, to ask those tough questions. And the participants, the folks who we see often as monsters and people who will never change, and people who are incapable of empathy and are, in a lot of people's eyes, downright evil. They come to the table ready to hear what these people who are volunteering their time have to say. And they're ready to be welcomed into a space where that's the norm. And to me, that's ideal. When we can have open, honest communication and really see beyond something that feels like a facade. One of the things that I always encourage the participants to do when we're first getting to know them is, we're going to talk about your offenses. We're going to talk about the crimes, and we expect you to tell us a little bit about what was going on in your life at the time that led to that. And that'll often be the end of the conversation. And I say, well, we want to know about you. What do you like to do? What are your hobbies? How did you grow up? How did, tell us about a special relationship in your life. And I think that gets pushed aside a lot, where we don't care and we don't want to hear about something positive.
Because that would humanize.
Exactly. That makes us far too connected. If I hear something that makes me kind of feel affection or something fond of this person, if I feel fondness for this person who did that, then, what's going on with me? And it's so human and I think really scary for people. And it's just a reality that is so looming over a lot of us. And I think that it's the bravest thing that you can do to come forward and say, I need help, and to come forward and say, I want to help.
I feel like you sort of answered 2 questions, maybe.
7.
Or maybe 7. But you definitely helped us to understand that dynamic. But I think what's being lived out in that program is could kind of speak or be transposed into the wider cultural moment that we're in. Mm-hmm. I was in South Africa 3 years ago in a township in just outside of Cape Town, and a community development worker, they had the word on the wall, Ubuntu. And as it was described to us, it was described as my well-being is tied up in your well-being. And in this cultural moment, there's so much, we just need to get connected, and we need to kind of come together. We have all this conflict and all this tension in our society, but I really feel like it's time for us to understand that our well-being is tied up in each other. Like we have to, if you're doing okay, I can be doing okay, and we can sort of look out. It's almost like caring for each other, and you're describing that. So any other final words or a message to the world? What's the message of COSA? What are you asking from? Are you looking for volunteers? The stage is yours.
Absolutely. So we always need volunteers. Getting in touch with us is as easy as looking up COSA Winnipeg online. We always need donations. I hate to grub for money, but the reality is that it's not very popular politically or socially,
right,
to be a part of a program that, the way that I describe it, is so often to volunteers, I'll wonder, like, why in the world do you want to volunteer for this? Like, you could go hang out with puppies at the Humane Society, and you've chosen this, and it's so meaningful. Not that, something else isn't as meaningful or just as, but there is something to be said about giving up time to invest in somebody else's care and what that does for yourself as well. It's not only selfless, but it feels selfish sometimes, because you get to meet people. People share their life with you. And it's a privilege and an honor to have people share stories and trust you with something as precious as their life and what they've experienced. And whether that's, it kind of ranges from trauma to total joy and happiness, and being able to celebrate together, and also being able to sit in silence together and process something with that person. It's a magical experience. And I really, truly believe that people who engage with the COSA program and Open Circle, with prison visitation, have taken a step to re-energize and re-engage with a community that has maybe often said, no thanks.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I want to get to know you. And to have that opportunity to sit across from somebody and have them say, I haven't had a visit in 35 years that I've been here, but it's nice to meet you, is something that you just can't describe. It's exactly what we need.
Mm-hmm.
Burt Bacharach said it, but what the world needs now is love, sweet love.
Let's sing it together.
Yeah, exactly. But it's very true. We need something genuine that pulls us back into what it means to be human, what it means to connect with somebody and understand that any emotion that you've probably felt in life, someone else has also experienced. And tying that together is, I think, the key to understanding how we actually get to a place of no more victims, and that nobody walks alone, and that community is for everybody.
Jennifer, amazing conversation, and I'm always blown away by people who kind of take their own darkness and trauma and make it into something beautiful, which you clearly have done. And I respect you deeply for your work, and thank you for helping our listeners understand a little more about this very dicey topic. And you handle it with such grace and rawness. I thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Dangerous Ideas for Social Change.